Hello everyone. For this project, I decided to talk about the Moravians in America. And the Moravian church or denomination is a lesser known denomination, but one that's definitely important in North Carolina history and American history in general. Growing up in North Carolina, I was constantly surrounded by various denominations. Just going to my grandparents' house, about a 10-mile drive, I'd have to pass 5 Baptist churches of various sub-denominations, a Presbyterian church, Methodist church, and a Pentecostal Holiness church. But during all that time living in North Carolina, I never saw a Moravian church, despite North Carolina's rich Moravian history. And to be completely honest, until a few years ago, I really didn't know much about the Moravian church, or the Moravians, except for that a good number of them still lived in the Winston-Salem area and that they fixed delicious cookies. So that's the reason that I decided to focus on them for this assignment. And the Moravian church, it traces its origins back to John Huss, and the Hussite movement. And much like Hus himself, his followers were persecuted, except for a lot of them were able to escape persecution by traveling to areas such as Bohemia and Moravia. And the ones that were exiled in Moravia, they formed what some historians consider the first Protestant denomination, called the Moravians because of where they settled. And throughout their time in exile and on into the 18th century, they would gather in small groups, practicing their Protestant faith. But in 1727, a small group of them had kind of a revival. Some of them likened it to the day of Pentecost, where they learned to love each other, as they put it. And this increased their interest in missions and spreading that love to others. And so they spread out all across the globe to Africa, the Caribbean, even the Arctic. But some of them ended up coming to North America, and specifically what would become the United States of America. The first Moravians to come to America settled in what would become New York, and their mission there was to evangelize to the Algonquin Indians in that area. They set up several missions, but no real permanent settlements. The first true permanent settlement was set up in Pennsylvania and was called Bethlehem. And today it's actually one of the largest cities in Pennsylvania, the 7th largest. But one of the most interesting groups, at least to myself, and maybe one of the ones that has the best legacy, was the group that settled in North Carolina. In the mid-18th century or so, Bishop August Gottlieb Spangenberg purchased a large tract of land in about central North Carolina and named it Wachovia. Some of you may be familiar with that name because of the bank that had the same name. It originated in the same area, and that's why it had that name. But from Wachovia, different groups broke off and settled new areas in the surrounding areas. Some of the settlements were Bethabara, Bethania, and Salem. And Christopher Hendricks, in his book, or in his article, I should say, "And You Will There Build a City," he talks about how these little settlements that broke off were congregation towns, very close-knit groups. They spread mission work and evangelized to the surrounding groups around the Indians. And as John Sinsbach points out in his book, A Separate Canaan, the African Americans in the area being in the rural South, they spread out to those areas and evangelized them. But within that actual settlement, they were very close-knit and didn't let a whole lot of outsiders in. And a lot of this was to preserve their traditions and their beliefs. But those settlements, they were kind of hubs of trading. A lot of the Moravians were skilled workers, the blacksmiths, carpenters, things like that. So a lot of those areas became kind of crossroads trading areas, and that's why a lot of the cities, or the settlements, ended up becoming large cities, like Wachovia and Bethabara became Winston-Salem, one of the largest cities in North Carolina today. But as the years went on, the Moravians spread out from North Carolina, with some of them going down to Georgia to spread evangelistic work to the Cherokee Indians living down there, as Kyle Fisher points out in his book, After Gnadenhutten. And he mentions that as the Moravians got to that area, it coincided with the Cherokee Indians being pushed further west to Oklahoma, and says that the Moravians followed them. So the Moravians today still exist in North America, but very small numbers, only about 30,000 of them. But they have a rich history, and their importance in American history is tied to the fact that they were some of the first ones to be missionaries to the Indians and to the African Americans.